in the discussion later today, if they can come forward, so we can and just position themselves here in the front, please. So we have no panelists? All right. So we have Mr. Thabo Mashaba, Mr. Nhlanhla Ndlovu, Dr. Fulufelo Nelwamondo, Dr. Petiwe Matutu, and Dr. Tandiwe Sitole, as well as Dr. Marsha Sotrikwa. If you could all please just come through to the front. It's right here. And then just to note that this is a live broadcast, so when we do start, I'm going to ask that we all have our phones on silent. We're also just waiting for the minister to arrive, and once he gets here, we shall begin. All right, can we please stand for the minister as he walks in, please? Thank you. Where's the pointer?
Yes, okay, how are you?
Thank you.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Am I sitting on the sofa? Sorry. Okay.
Oh, my bad. All right, thank you, everybody. You may take a seat. Now, if you'll just bear with me, I'm going to give a signal to the TV station so they can take us live. And once I've been given the signal to go, we'll officially begin. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you. My name is Sumay Zake, and I'll be your MC for this morning's session. Let me take this moment to acknowledge our special guests, the Honorable Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation, that is Dr. Blade Nzimande, as well as the DG of the Department of Science and Innovation, Dr. Phil Njwacha. Minister DG, thank you both for your time this morning. A warm welcome also to our viewers on Business Day TV, that is DSTV channel 412, as well as those who are watching us across the various online platforms. Thank you for your time as well. We are coming to you live from the CSIR International Convention Center, where the Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation, Dr. Blade Nzimande, has received the first national tracer study of doctoral graduates in South Africa, also known as the PhD Tracer Study. Now, what is this study, you may ask? Well, it's a study that tracks, among other things, the demographic attributes, work experience, career paths, and mobility of doctorate holders who graduated from South African universities between the years of 2000 and 2018. It is a national imperative to grow the academic pipeline and specifically to increase the production of PhD graduates in South Africa as a policy priority. The training of such students is a long and significant endeavor, and the question of the return on investment in producing PhD graduates is a policy concern for the public funders of education. While there has been a steep increase in the numbers of doctoral graduates in South Africa, especially over the past 10 to 12 years, the capacity of the labor market to absorb such increasing numbers is unknown. The number of PhDs in a population plays a pivotal role in a country's socio-economic development. It is for this reason that it becomes important to know the impact of PhD graduates on the socio-economic environment. In South Africa, we have not empirically demonstrated and domesticated this cause and effect relationship, and that is why this study is important. So, we've got a lot to get through this morning, and to kick off the proceedings, I will now hand over to the Program Director, Mr. Imran Patel, who is the DDG of Research and Development as well as Support. Imran, over to you. Please give him a hand as he walks through.
Thank you and good morning. My purpose is very brief, is to welcome people to this very important, significant event. We were discussing with the minister this morning that this is a significant piece of work to get a better handle on PhDs. I want to recognize a number of people in the room, the Director General, DDGs, and other senior officials from both the Department of Science and Innovation and the Department of Higher Education and Training, representatives from the private and business sectors, representatives of other government departments, higher education institutions, labor and civil society, representatives and leaders of science councils who are here today. In particular, I want to note Dr. Jennifer Molwantwa, who's the CEO of the Water Research Commission, who partnered with the Department of Science and Innovation on this important study. Dr. Fulufelo Nolwamondo, I don't see him here today. He's on this side. and Dr. Petiwe Matutu, the CEO of the NRF and USAF respectively, who will form part of the panel discussion later. I think online we have Professor Johan Mouton, who will be presenting the findings of this survey. Other panelists will be part of the panel discussion later this morning. And then in particular the PhD graduates who kindly gave of their time to participate in this study. Without any further ado, I want to then invite the Honorable Minister, Minister Blade Nzimande, to come on to the podium to do the opening address, after which we will get Dr. Molwantwa to present this report to the Minister. And then we will go online for Professor Mouton to present the findings of the survey. Minister.
Thank you very much, Program Director. And thanks also to our media host, Business Day TV. Thanks, Program Director. Let me start by greeting our DG, Dr. Philip Jwacha, and the DSI Deputy Director General responsible for this area, Mr. Imran Patel, and all the DDGs who are present, both from DSI and Department of Higher Education and Training, representatives of science councils, our national research institutions, particularly Dr. Jennifer Mloanto, the CEO of the Water Research Commission. Thanks for having hosted this initiative for us, and by partnering with the DSI, Dr. Fulufelo Nelwamondo, the CEO of the NRF, and Ms. Petiwe Matutu, the CEO of USAF, Universities South Africa, who are also going to form part of the panel later. Professor Johan Mouton, the director of the DSI NRF Center of Excellence for Scientometrics and STI Policy, who led the research team, representatives of the private sector and business, representatives from various government departments who are here, and all those, by the way, who have also joined us online, you are particularly welcome. Representatives of our institutions of higher education, labor and civil society, distinguished guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's my pleasure to be joining you this morning on the occasion of the launch of the ministerial launch, of the National Tracer Study of Doctoral Graduates in South Africa. Our current National Tracer Study of Doctoral Graduates in South Africa is the first such comprehensive study by government and our higher education institutions and research institutions. Previous studies were limited in focus and scope, thus not systemic, and never zoomed into certain sectors, certain disciplines, or even lower qualifications levels. Building on the Water Research Commission's capabilities in conducting the tracer study of water PhDs in South Africa, the DSI assigned the Water Research Commission as the project manager for this national PhD tracer study. Through this launch, we aim at the dissemination of key study findings and recommendations, as well as stimulating a discussion with key stakeholders, be it government, business, higher education institutions, civil society, and students, on the value of the PhD in society and in our economy. Ladies and gentlemen, the correlation between the weighted number of PhDs, as in the number of PhDs per million of the population, and the country's economic and innovation performance is well established globally. DG, when I was being briefed earlier this morning, and inspired by this study, I said to your team, joined by DDG Dr. Soqiwe, can we please come up with a comprehensive strategy of massively increasing the number of PhDs and postdocs in South Africa? And I was saying this also because our single biggest ally in this is the president himself. If increasing the number of PhDs has got many positive outcomes in terms of our national system of innovation, in terms of the quality of our teaching staff in our universities, then there is no reason why we shouldn't do this. Now we even have got a base in this study to know what is happening. So I really think that much as it is late in the term of this administration, we can at least lay a very firm foundation for the next administration to significantly increase our PhDs. You took me, DG, to an important institute that I've never been, the National Institutes of Health in the United States, where the acting director firstly apologized for having punished us for having discovered Omicron, and apologized quite profusely, because he said that discovery saved a lot of American lives. He then told me in that campus, where, by the way, Donald Trump was ill with COVID, he was admitted in a hospital there. He said in that campus alone, they've got 6,000 postdocs, but less than 2% are from Africa. And he said, what can you do to bring more postdocs? I'm offering you, and we will pay for a lot of those postdocs from the continent. So that's an open invitation from the acting director there. So the issue of increasing PhDs and postdocs is a priority. I think that on such a platform is important that I say that. Because with the pivotal role that PhDs play in the country's socio-economic development, South Africa has not as yet empirically demonstrated and domesticated this cause and effect relationship, although evidence is there. I've also said, DG, let's also benchmark ourselves internationally as the next step from this tracer study as to where we are. Both the Department of Science and Innovation's white paper on science, technology, and innovation and the STI decadal plan seek to expand the research enterprise by supporting more PhDs and build a strong pipeline of human capabilities. The tracing of PhD holders or graduates into their careers and occupations in different sectors, including the entrepreneurial sector, is important and justified given that the PhD is an apex qualification obtained after a considerable amount of investment, of upward of 20 years actually, in learning, teaching, and supervision support, mostly at the state's or taxpayers' expense. Advanced countries have been conducting studies to trace the mobility and careers of PhD holders. The European Union countries, for example, have commissioned these studies under the general theme or title of the mobilities and careers of doctorate holders, to trace what is often called the stock and flows of PhDs in and out of different sectors and EU member state countries. With a significant portion of PhDs enrolled and graduating from South African universities coming from outside South Africa, and with South Africa having positioned itself as a PhD training destination, especially for the African continent, it is thus important for the country to answer questions relating to the brain gain, brain drain, or brain circulation of these highly skilled human resources and human capabilities. I do not want to go into the details of the study, as that will be done immediately after I've spoken. But I must say we have been concerned about the supply and demand side of PhDs in South Africa. While we were making strides and successive leaps in increasing the numbers of PhDs graduating annually from our universities, the question of absorbing these PhDs by the country's economy has tended to lag behind. The DSI conducts annual research and development surveys, and our NACI publishes an annual STI indicators report. Most of the indicators in the two reports are dependent and influenced by the number of PhD that the country produces. This study reflects on the PhD absorptive capacity by the private sector, the public research system, and higher education institutions. In our other attempt in assessing the socio-economic impact of our postgraduate funding, we have requested the NRF to establish a digital platform to track all the postgraduate students it has funded over the years. Now, there is no reason, Dr. Nelwamondo, for the NRF not to have this capacity. Absolutely. I can understand other entities, but not the NRF. Please do develop this capacity because we are quite capable of doing that. In our other attempt, we must also use this digital platform to look at the entire postgraduate human resources development pipeline of the NRF-funded students. Most importantly, this PhD tracer study will be useful input into the digital platform, even though the National PhD Tracer Study is not necessarily limited or restricted to only NRF-funded students. As the department, entrusted with driving research and innovation, we pride ourselves in using well-researched data and evidence in making decisions about critical policy issues or interventions. This research body of knowledge and the ensuing evidence will add to a repertoire of other studies commissioned under my ministry of both the Department of Science and Innovation and Higher Education and Training. In closing, I will hasten to mention some of the studies that have formed the basis of evidence and policy decisions on matters of postgraduate studies and the general support of researchers. I would humbly like to ask you to peruse through these studies as part of this. We have, for instance, done a study in 2015 on the retention, conversion, and progression of postgraduate students, which sought to investigate the leaky postgraduate human resource development pipeline. We have also done postgraduate research and training in engineering survey in 2018, which investigated low PhD graduation in engineering, particularly by women PhD engineers. I'm happy that we have a black woman PhD engineer in the panel today. An interesting finding here is that is of direct relevance to the PhD absorption question is that most PhDs in engineering get employed in the financial, insurance, and fintech sectors in the private sector. Why? I understand there's someone from the banks here. I was at some stage involved leading a campaign for the transformation of the financial sector. I learned then that engineers are very fundamental in making financial decisions, whether it's in terms of infrastructure and many other things. That's why the financial sector is increasingly absorbing engineers. Also, the other study that I suggest you look at is the study on building the cadre of emerging researchers in South Africa, done by the DSI, called the Silent Majority Study, which looked at who holds PhDs, who actively publishes, and who actively seeks research funding among emerging researchers in our university system. The other study that we've done by DHET is that on the recruitment, retention, and progression of black South African academics, especially women in South African universities, which was done in 2019, which looked at particularly the recruitment, retention, and progression of black and women academics in the higher education sector. There are a number of recommendations that I have also looked at from this study, which are very important. I've mentioned also the issue of, on my side, international benchmarking, but also it's going to be very important, just to repeat once more, DG. Let's come out soon with a strategy to expand the number of PhDs. By the way, I'm working with DG Sishi of DHET to set aside not less than R1 billion towards postgraduate studies from the National Skills Fund. They are no more important an issue than that. But the issue is, where do we prioritize that R1 billion? The president is very excited about this when I told him, but I won't speak for him. Watch how he said that he would like to actually expand that R1 billion through his own ways. I won't speak for him. He will speak for himself when the time comes. Thank you very much for this study. By the way, DG, if I always scold your department, Imran, we're doing so much important work, but we undersell ourselves. This is such an important study. I wish the whole country would be listening to this. But I'm sure Bushle and them and Ishmael will be able to spread this word so that it's understood what we are actually doing. Thank you very much. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Minister. At this stage, can I call Dr. Jennifer Mwanta onto the stage to hand over this very important report to the Minister?
Behind. Yeah, but it's fine. Okay.
Morning, everybody. All protocol observed. Minister, I think from the Water Research Commission, the DSI team, reference group members, as well as the Stellenbosch team that led this project, it is our pleasure to release this study and to hand over this report to you. We have bound the report so that you don't check whether there's content in it or not, but knowing that you have a PhD, we hope it makes for a good reading for you, but not only that it influences policy decisions that are made in this regard. So I'd like to hand over the report to you.
Thank you very much, sis. Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, you want to take a photo? Yeah. Is that a real camera? Thank you very much.
Once more, thank you. Once more, ladies and gentlemen, we are here to present the high-level finding or summary of the report, and we believe that by you being present here today, you'll be able to engage with the report and obviously decode it, but it's not a highly technical report, Minister. It is a straightforward report. It was conducted out of a study that actually emanated from a study that the WRC initiated in the year 2000, where it wanted to focus on tracing and tracking the water sector or water-focused PhDs in South Africa. And by measure of good, obviously, luck, there were members of the DSI team that were on the reference group. And the findings of that study indicated that there is a high demand for water PhDs, and that 66% of the PhDs that were tracked at that time were in South Africa, while some 92, over the overall 92%, which are in Africa. And then it was also found that there's 90% of work in jobs related to water and sanitation do require and can benefit from PhD graduates. And therefore, this study led to the DSI colleagues and other reference group members asking the question, to what extent are these findings related to the other PhDs across other sectors and broadly in the country? and therefore this then led to the expansion of the project funded by the DSI to lead to this trade study of all PhD graduates in South Africa, and this looked at our focus in the universities in South Africa between the years 2000 and 2018. As said, it was funded by the DSI, it was managed by the WRC and executed by the Stellenbosch University under Professor Johan Moten. Minister, from the WRC side, I think it is also quite critical that we mention this is not the only collaboration that we've had with the DSI. This work really builds on a solid track record of collaboration between ourselves as the Water Research Commission and the DSI. We do have a number of projects that are ongoing, including the WADA program, that is the Water Technologies Demonstration Program, the SASTEP, which is the South African Sanitation Technology Enterprise Program, the European Commission funded Horizon 2020 projects, Water for All, as well as the Water RDI map, which is currently being implemented. We have also then, Minister, looked at how the study was conducted, and in essence, we noted that it is also a critical imperative and a contributor input, in fact, to whether or not we are meeting the objectives of the National Development Plan and Vision 2020, as we know that we have set ourselves a target by 2030. So, Minister, a number of over 29,000 PhD graduates have been recorded to have graduated between the last 10 to 12 years, that is that period of the study. And only about 15,000 contact details were able to be obtained of such PhD graduates. And then they were sent an invitation to participate in a survey, and only about 6.5 of the 15,000 responded on the survey. And also then there was also about 117 in-depth interviews that took place. So from this perspective, it is taken that this is a significant representation of the cohort that of interest, which are the PhD graduates, and that the study can be a representative of the broader picture. The following headline findings were made from the study, Minister, that 61% of the respondents studied and completed their PhDs part-time while engaged in some employment. And I think this is a very encouraging fact, because it indicates that as we are doing work, strategic and operational work within society, we then identify challenges or problems, and we take this as an opportunity to contribute to new knowledge and to investigate and find out how we can solve these problems. And through this, a lot of people then undertake their PhD studies. Secondly, most frequently mentioned source of funding for the PhDs was self-funding. And Minister, I think this is really linked to the fact that a lot of the people would be studying after the age of 34, and they are already in employment, and therefore there isn't capacity and financial support to them. And I think this is a policy position that really needs to be looked at. The vast majority of graduates were also found to be employable, with just on average 2% not finding employment within the first year of completing their doctorate. And this indicates, Minister, that it is a critical skill that can be absorbed. But what is also most important is that even though they did not find employment within the specific fields that they studied, the robustness and the agility of a PhD graduate enables them to be able to be absorbed, and we've just now indicated that some of them have been absorbed in the financial sector. And also we must acknowledge and appreciate the fact that in the private sector, Minister, critical thinking, new knowledge, new innovations is really embraced, whereas in our public sector, policy and review and updates, it's something that is really kind of not quite taken up. And this is where these skills will really be critical and can contribute to society. And then we found that nearly 2/3 of the respondents were employed in the higher education sector. I think this is very important. It indicates that our higher education sector is in good hands. We have got knowledge generators that are themselves experts and qualified, and therefore they are able to contribute to the knowledge generation within the country. There's about 20% of the respondents also received a postdoctoral fellowship. I think this is a practice that in South Africa it's not really embraced, it's not really funded, it's not really supported. In fact, you get a lot of postdoctoral fellowships that are coming into the country, even coming from outside and from Europe. They are funded by their countries to come and contribute. And I think this is one area which we need to also focus on. 1 of 3 postdoctoral fellows accept 1 or more postdoctoral positions in their first fellowship. And South Africa has also benefited significantly from the net inward flow of doctoral students and fellowships. But I think it is important that we see this as an investment where we can also fund postdoctoral fellowships, that they can go out there into the world and learn the new ways and innovation and bring that to South Africa in order to enhance our policy and decision making. There's other evidence that has been found, Minister. I think it's largely in the report, but what is of critical importance is that there are some recommendations that were made from the study which relate mainly to policy making. We believe that this tracer studies, not only around PhDs, but I think the investment of the government and private sector into postdoctoral studies, including PhDs and postdoctoral fellowships, need to be irregular. So we can do it every 5 years in order to be able to track, in order to be able to review where we are at, what is the 2030 target, and how far are we from achieving it. And we need to do also further research into the financing of doctoral studies, Minister. We know that most of the support that is provided would also be talking about you have to be below the age of 35. But when we are talking about this critical mass of people that are already in employment, that see challenges, that seek to address these challenges and come up with solutions, we really need to think differently around that. More work is also needed to understand how changes in the nature of work are affecting expectations of the kind and range of skills that postdoctoral graduates should have. The relevant role players being the universities in South Africa, the DSI, NRF, Council for Higher Education, and others should collectively investigate how the position and status of postdoctoral fellows can be strengthened, and measures are required to ensure that the value and talent of this group is not lost. Lastly, Minister, we need to further investigate the absorptive capacity of the economy's knowledge sector around the postdoctoral graduates. I think the most critical part, Minister, which is an irony, is that we contribute largely, and government has got a very big role to play within South African universities. And when postgraduates complete their studies, particularly from Africa, then we are told, you know, this is a scarce skills, you need to apply for a work permit. I mean, a work permit will cost something like 3,000 rands, but the government has probably made an investment of over 500,000 rands on that graduate. So we really need to start seeing the return on investment and understand that as the postgraduate studies commence, that we're making an investment. I mean, when you look at the United States and other countries, we find that the contributions of IP and innovation is largely coming from doctorates and postdoctoral fellows. And these are students that would have gone to the United States just to study. But it is their decision to say, let them keep them and get the return on the investment that we've made. So lastly, from my side personally, I think it's that the work ethic, the critical thinking, and the ability to question issues, to adapt and improve strategic and operational outcomes of government can be achieved through the use of postdoctoral graduates. The WRC and PhDs, the WRC strategy is grounded on the premise that PhDs and postgraduates are at the crux of water and sanitation challenges in South Africa, as well as in human capacity and capability. It is one of our key components, outcomes of the WRC strategy, that we need to develop human capital, especially high-end skill in the water and sanitation and science sectors. This is one of our primary levers for contributing to the National Transformation and Redress Project. Just in the last financial year, Minister, we reported 128 PhDs as well as 14 postdoctoral fellows that have been supported by the WRC. And therefore, this study has shown that PhDs, regardless of sector, remain a valuable and impactful investment area for funders in the National Institution of Innovation. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Molwanta. I think I want to hand over at this stage to the moderator of the panel and to call up the panelists for the panel discussion, which will take the next 25-30 minutes. So can we get Marcia Petiwe, Dr. Nalwamondo? But let me hand over to you too.
Thank you. All right, as explained, we're going to get into a very quick panel discussion. So if I can call up the panelists one by one as I read out their names. That is Nhlanhla Ndlovu, who is the CEO of NEDLAC. If you can come and take a seat on my immediate left. It's the NEDLAC Community Trust. All right. Thabo Mashaba, ABSA Group Head of Employee Relations. Professor Fulufelo Nelwamondo, CEO of the National Research Foundation. Dr. Petiwe Matutu, CEO of Universities South Africa. And Dr. Marcia Sotrikwa, who is the Deputy Director General, University Education at the Department of Higher Education and Training, as well as Dr. Tandiwe Sitole, who's a young PhD graduate in chemical engineering. If you could all please come to the stage, and we shall get into a quick Q&A. This will also be an interactive session. So if you do have a question for any of the panelists on stage, if you could just raise your hand, we'll get a roving mic to come through to you. You can pose your question. Please do keep it brief because we are limited for time. All right, I'm going to stand here. Someone's mic is feeding back. If you can just hold the mics towards yourselves, please. Thank you. All right, let me start off with Mr. Nhlanhla Ndlovu. So the investment in PhDs is a significant exercise, as we have heard. And for South Africa as a developing country, developing this PhD pipeline is a priority. And the question is, should it be a priority, particularly in light of the huge unemployment figures that we are facing in the country?
Good morning. Of course, I think it's related. In fact, now, Dr. Nzimande will tell you, this year, at the beginning of the year, we actually committed, the Department of Higher Education and Training committed to at least having one community college per district. One community college per district. It's part of responding to unemployment. There's various others like initiatives, but the investment, for instance, in the community college system requires that there should be quality teaching staff and the production then of graduates that will immediately be absorbed into economy. And this is linked to economic reconstruction and recovery plan. So the truth about it is that it's not like an either or. By in fact investing in PhDs and like supporting innovation and quality teaching, you are likely to have outcomes. And remember also that in South Africa we have got a huge percentage of youth not in employment, not in education and training. So if you basically like support PhDs, those that are going to innovation help with the employment of creation, those that go to teaching, they also help with production of other graduates, even in the pipeline of education.
Anybody else want to contribute to that on the panel? No? All right. Let's look at the South Africa labor market. Are we equipped to absorb these PhDs that are coming through?
Thank you for that question. We, in financial services, we use PhD or doctoral candidates or graduates in our various disciplines. At ABSA, we employ more than 100 doctoral students. And I've gleaned from the research that some of them are self-funding, which, of course, some of our employees who are doctoral students as well as self-funding. And I think what we have to address is the various sectors in which the doctoral students can be absorbed and the methodology of absorbing as well. Because the doctoral degrees or PhDs are very intimidating, especially for employers. If you come to a panel of interviewers and you have a doctorate, so it may be a little bit intimidating. Self-funding and self-study while they are employed tends to be a better way of them being absorbed in the various areas of our institution or of our banks, because we use their critical thinking capabilities, their innovative capabilities in the various areas, especially in project financing. We need those kind of skills. But how they get into those streams has to be within, and we find it that if they self-study within the various areas where they are, the progression is much more quicker and the contribution is much more noticeable as opposed to coming from outside. Of course, we do hire from outside in, and the majority are internally. And where we operate as well, what we find in our own institution is that about 40% are from our African continent in the countries where we operate, and about 60% are in the South African environment, bearing the testimony that South Africa is producing quite a lot of the students or doctoral students or employees that come from South Africa. So back to the question that was asked earlier on, it is useful, and we have to collaborate continually to ensure that our country produces these doctoral students or PhD students in the various institutions, especially in academia, where we find a lot of the skill sets that we need are grown from them.
Is there an increasing trend when you look at the demand for PhD and doctoral students?
Better than it was previously. As we find now, there's an increased number of those that we hire in those disciplines, especially in the technical disciplines like engineering, finance, economics, and we see that there's an increase and also an interest for those that are self-studying because we are very big in funding master's degrees like MBAs and so forth, and they graduate from that to study PhDs, and we see the number increasing as well in our employees specifically.
When we look at the job market and the pace of economic development, is there a correlation that we can point to?
Experiment.
So, thank you very much. I think that's a very good question in terms of the correlation. The job market, if one thinks of it in this form, excuse me, it's becoming evident that I think if people are starting to recognize the shift that the system is moving towards around the aspects of innovation. If you look at, and maybe to link to the point that was raised earlier, when you start looking into the absorption rate of PhDs within the industry at the moment, while I don't have the figures, my assessment from what one piece on the ground, I'm seeing a very, growing trend towards a good appetite to actually have people with PhDs working within the within the business sector. I can give you examples of some of the students that I've sort of seen who were in academia, but as soon as they got their PhDs in the engineering spaces, in the computer science spaces, they moved into the banking sector, they moved into the telecommunication companies and so forth. So I don't have the studies yet, but it's very clear that there's a very interesting trend that one can start seeing as a trajectory that says, there's a point towards a correlation between the absorption in the private sector from the PhDs.
Are we empowering PhD graduates with entrepreneurial skills and the ability to create jobs? Let me start with you before I move on.
That's a very good question, and I think there's a gap that is there in terms of how do we ensure that the PhDs that we have are not just academic PhDs. As much as we really appreciate the role of fundamental science, and fundamental science is critical, I mean, that's a skill that the whole idea of PhDs is aimed to address that gap. But what is critical is now to say, how do we deal with exposing PhD students, when they're still students, to entrepreneurial activities, to private sector activities, and so forth. If I use an example from the NRF at the moment, what we're trying to do, we're now trying to say, all the PhDs that we are going to fund going forward, they should not graduate, and of course we don't have control over how they graduate because it falls within the higher education sector. But we are saying they must be exposed, they must spend between 3 to 18 months within the private sector. They must spend, if they're not spending that time in the private sector, they should spend it internationally within other sectors in the private sector or in academia elsewhere. But that exposure starts bringing elements of them being able to see entrepreneurial skills that may be existing in Canada, for example, and say, how do we bring those on board into South Africa? So exposure becomes one of the critical elements. And we're trying to then empower them, we're trying to then expose them to the gaps that may exist in our space, but they're not gaps somewhere else. But by that mobility, they then start seeing that they can actually move more into the political space. Maybe just one point on this part is that we need to actually acknowledge two things. One is that we still have a very big challenge of unemployment in the country. And we can't just wait for jobs to be created. We have to say, how do we empower these people to then be open to creating jobs on their own? How do you actually then say, I've done a very good PhD that can actually lead to a patent, and how do I actually take this from a particular patent to a product that goes into a market, that becomes a commercial product, which then I can employ 2 people, later on 10 people, and so on and so on. And that will then allow us to then open new industries. That is one part. The other part is around, we have, and not only for South Africa, but it's for the entire continent. The World Economic Forum states that by the year 2030, Africa will be the home to 42% of the world's youth, 42%. So it's a question of how do we then take advantage of this young population that we have? How do we ensure that as much as we're skilling them from the qualification point of view, we also skill them to create jobs that are sustainable? And that's not only for South Africa, but for the entire continent, because I think that's a position for Africa. We also goes back to the point that Dr. Mulonda spoke about in terms of then being able to work with African continent countries, where we're saying, let's understand how, the mobility within Africa. Let's allow skills to then sort of flow and assist us in areas where we have gaps. Thank you.
Dr. Matutu, from a university's perspective, are we doing enough to make sure that that skill set is infused into the various curricula?
From the university's perspective, we are quite clear about the various differing qualifications. We've got a 3-tiered kind of system where we've got academic qualifications, and there are normal universities which are offering that largely. And we have universities of technology, and largely focused on professional qualifications. And we have comprehensive universities which are looking at a combination of the two. So on that basis, you'll find out that the focus largely on universities of technology would be the kind of skill set which is required by the industry immediately. And as a consequence of that, in the training, there's something which is called work-integrated learning, where a student is required to spend a specific amount of time in various sectors that are likely to absorb the student. And within those qualifications, you'll find out that there are people from those sectors who play an advisory role on the kind of curriculum which needs to be provided for these people to be suitable for those. And then you'll have your traditional universities, which are focused largely at training people who are problem solvers, regardless of the kind of environment that they find themselves in. So in that case, you find out that when these get into the private sector or into the public sector, there will be a certain amount of time which is required for adjustment. However, once they get into understanding what is being done, because they've been trained in problem solving, you'll find out that they are able to succeed. On the issue of entrepreneurship, the University of South Africa, which I lead, is running a number of programs which are supported by the Department of Higher Education and Training, which are focused largely on encouraging students into being entrepreneurs. And we get a three kind of element focus where we look at getting students to be entrepreneurial, assisting them with incubation of their businesses, and also competitions which expose them to other countries in terms of how business incubation is being done. And then we focus on the teaching and learning aspect of entrepreneurship. So within that, we do have a community of practice of academics which are looking at how best to create an ideal environment for teaching and learning within entrepreneurship. And then we have a research component of it. So we take that approach. However, overall, we look then at creating the economic activation offices within universities. We've established 10 of these, where we are looking at the staff members there and looking at opportunities internationally for exposure for them so that they know exactly all the elements which make for an entrepreneurial universities, the ecosystem which is required for that, and how best to advance that, and the skills required for them, which are not necessarily within the curriculum, extracurricular for their students to be entrepreneurial. So all of that is funded by the Department of Higher Education and Training, but implemented by University South Africa. Insofar as the issue of the demand and supply for PhD graduates in the workplace, if one just looks at the data which is available within higher education institutions, there's an uneven distribution of PhD holders among universities. Those universities which are historically advantaged would have the percentage of their staff having PhD qualifications very close to the target that we have within the National Development Plan. However, those universities which were previously disadvantaged, having very low levels of staff with PhD qualifications. Now the question is the availability of the permanent positions for people to sit within those universities, because they create a situation where you find universities they are not competitive. You use PhD holders to compete, to exchange internationally, to learn, come back, implement. Now, if you have PhD holders who are only capable of providing supervision to the current students, there's more that they should be doing. And that capacity is just not there. Whereas the others are able to use a pool which is relatively big enough for people to be able to operate. Thank you.
Staying with that theme of education, Dr. Sotikwa, let me ask you, when it comes to the historically disadvantaged institutions, how are they coping or doing when you compare them to the likes of the universities of Pretoria and UCT, for example?
In terms of, sorry.
I'll give you an opportunity to respond, but please go ahead.
Thank you for that question. In 2017, Minister, through the Ministerial Task Team, commissioned research to understand the impediments to transformation in the higher education sector. And it is very clear that the unequal distribution of opportunities, resources, historical trajectory has impacted how historically disadvantaged institutions are able to compete. Now, I don't quite like the word compete, because I don't think it's where our focus should be. Our focus should be, does every student in this country have an equal opportunity to enter the job market, regardless of which institution they enter? And our focus in the public institutions is exactly that. So we have, through various grants, directed funds to historically disadvantaged institutions, so that the students who come out of those institutions are able to enter the job market on an equal basis as students who come from established institutions. We've generated extensive funds towards, firstly, PhDs, and then master students. We have established extensive partnerships with global institutions who are assisting us with training the lecturers in some of these universities. University of Mpumalanga is an excellent example. They're a newly established university, but largely still within the cohort of historically disadvantaged institutions, based on location, residence, and opportunities. And it has been fascinating to see the number of PhD students generated in a short space of time, because of international partnerships and collaborations. We have international scholarships as well, where we are facilitating opportunities for lecturers and students in historically disadvantaged universities to gain global exposure. We hope that will go a long way. That is the grants, the collaboration and partnerships, close attention to supporting our institutions, ensuring that the students who emerge from these institutions get this recognition and are able to enter the job market. I just want to point out that, in fact, the National Development Plan has set a target of 5,000 PhDs by 2030. And that is also a huge focus at the moment. And we are calling to South Africans, don't be shy of learning. Take it a step further. We will assist in whatever way we can to advance your interest in scholarly development. I want to say this because I think many of our youngsters believe that after doing your masters, there's no hope for you. And we want to say, remain determined. Go back and study. And you will experience most invaluable experience of firstly acquiring knowledge, pursuit of knowledge, and scholarly accomplishments. You know, when we look at PhDs, and I heard the comment here now about academic PhDs, it's as if it's a not to have. And I know we are speaking amongst a business-oriented community and audience. Academic PhDs are very important. I think Dr. Matutu made a comment around problem solving. And that is the output for academic PhDs. They remain as relevant as, for lack of a better word, practical PhDs. They remain relevant, and we need more of those, particularly given where we are globally, around the kind and complexity of problems that we are confronting. That makes, I think, an excellent business case to sustain funding for academic PhDs. Thanks.
Dr. Matutu, you wanted to respond to that?
I think.
All right. Before I pose the next question, are there any questions from the audience? Do we have a roving mic available? Oh, okay. If you can use just state who you are and who your question is directed to, and please do keep it brief.
Good morning. My name is Manzai. I'm from the University of Pretoria. I'm a SACHI chair. I have some few comments to make. The problems that historically black universities or historically disadvantaged universities are suffering from is that as the other researchers like leave CSIR or go to any one of those, they find a problem with administrative issues. It takes long for the administrators to approve what they are asking for, even though NRF may have given money. The other thing is that some of the students who come from historically disadvantaged universities are willing to learn when they come to our institutions, but some are not willing at all. That is, they are not investing enough time in learning the new environment. I'll give an example. I took a student from University of Limpopo on LIBRI, European Union funding. In 3 months, she has done so well that she went to the South African Institute of Physics conference and she won a prize. Another important point that I wish people be aware of about African collaboration is that it is good to train people from other countries and they go back home and we work with them from home. We have produced a number of students with the University of Dar es Salaam, University of Zambia, University of Rwanda. And then on the financial sector, we have seen many of our students going in there at master's degree and they get jobs. So Dr. Matutu spoke about the skill that students have, which is, if you have done this degrees like mathematics, you are a problem solver. Hire students in any area of life, whether it's in municipalities or whatever, then we'll be able to reduce unemployment because those students are trained to solve problems. So I have seen Germany is taking a lot of our students. They just go in like that, especially the PhDs. They give them permanent jobs. So to all of us, as we are embarking on improving employment of our students in the country, let us open these doors for all students to be aware of where opportunities are. I've spoken a lot to Dr. Nomlamondi about the unemployed science graduates. You have not yet answered me. Thank you.
All right, I do note the questions. Let me just take that gentleman's questions and I'll come back to the two of you later on. If you could just keep it brief, please, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm Zurab Janelidze. I'm the president of the South African Mathematical Society. So I'll ask the question and I'll give very brief context. Do you think there is a value in supporting PhD studies of older South Africans who do not qualify for the NRF funding due to their age? Now, the reason why I'm asking this question is that young PhD graduates wouldn't go into teaching profession at school especially. There are better paid jobs waiting for them. And because of that, we have practically no PhD holders in school education system. In mathematics, this would have been especially beneficial since PhD in mathematics gives you a completely different outlook on the subject when you teach the subject. And so the teachers who are teaching at schools for a long time, it would have been very beneficial for them to do PhD, but they can't because of competitive nature of grants. They cannot get the grant, not from the NRF because of their age, and the teaching load is very high at school, so it's difficult to do it part-time as well. So it would have been wonderful to have opportunity for teachers to put aside their job for a couple of years and do PhD. So that's the context of my question. Thank you.
Who's your question directed to? Anyone on the panel?
Can it be directed to the Minister of Education?
I suppose it can. Whether or not you'll get a response is something else. All right, Minister, are you willing to answer that question? Quickly. Should be, yeah.
No, in brief, I don't want to take the time of the panel. I mean, the suggestion you are making is absolutely excellent. I hadn't thought of this matter in the manner in which you are actually posing it. that perhaps in our own thinking, we need to be able to say, in mobilizing funds for more PhDs, we need to set aside some funds for those kinds of categories. Experienced people, it would be like you're over 40, over 45, who may still have the energy, well, they still have, most of them, to do PhDs, to be supported, to be given money to actually, because they are likely to stay where they are, because as you say, they are unlikely to be getting jobs for your younger PhDs, and so on. It's an excellent idea, I must say, on my side. Well, the minister was asked in this instance. If you disagree as the panel, it's your own problem. As far as I'm concerned, I think it's an excellent idea which we seriously have to think about. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Anyway, okay, if you can respond there.
Thank you very much for that question. And I think, as the minister has said, I think we acknowledge the challenge that you've articulated so well. One of the challenges that we have, and Minister will agree with me, if we had all the funds, we will fund way more than what we are funding at the moment. So when we started putting restrictions to then say you should apply by the age of 32 for a PhD so that you can graduate by the time you're 35, it was after analyzing the data that we have in the system, saying, as opposed to funding somebody for a PhD at the age of 58 who can be done at the age of 62 versus funding somebody who's much younger, who will actually have more benefits offering to the system. And that's the reason why the postgraduate funding policy sort of came with the age limits in a way, which is, again, following the ministerial guidelines. However, we take note of what you're saying, and I think it's a key point. Thank you very much.
All right, just to make sure, was your question covered, or was it just comments that you're sorted? All right, let me get to Dr. Sithole, who's a PhD graduate. I want to ask you, having just graduated, what sort of support do PhD candidates get? And from your experience, is it adequate?
Thank you. Can you please repeat the question?
I was saying that being a recent graduate, what sort of support did you receive through your studies, and was that adequate?
Thank you so much for the question. For me, I have received funding. I've been supported by the National Research Foundation for Masters and my PhD, and I also received support from my institution, which is the University of Johannesburg. I also received support again from the National Research Foundation through the Black Academic Advancement Program, which plans to accelerate young academics into professorships. For me, that was a postdoctoral, of which it allowed me to travel all over the world to interact and also to collaborate with researchers all over the world. At the moment, I'm collaborating with 12 established researchers in India, you name them, Denmark and so forth, is through the National Research Foundation. And thank you for that initiative that the NRF has created in terms of Black Academic Advancement Program. Surely next time when I'm sitting here, I will be a professor. I just completed the program last year, and it's really, I think, Minister, you need to invest more on that program, because it really works. I have seen that I have moved from those who understand research. I think my citations have moved from being 8 in 2020. At the moment, I'm sitting at roughly 200 citations, and my H index as well has improved. So it's through that program. This year, I have managed to publish around 9 journal articles with assistance with my collaborators internationally. So it's through that Black Academic Advancement Program whereby in that 2 years, you really sit down and you do research, no teaching involved, you just focus on teaching. So thank you so much, the NRF, for the initiative, and yeah, continue to do more. I know in the studies, in this report that we are discussing today, I think you are standing on 22%. You are supporting about 22% of the funding models that we have in terms of the PhD. So I'd like to propose that we do more in terms of collaborating with industries. For instance, if you do a project as a PhD, we need to focus on multidisciplinary project. For instance, myself, I consider myself as one of the fortunate PhD graduate, because the project that I was doing, it was multidisciplinary in a sense that it was a bit of chemistry, it was a bit of chemical engineering, a bit of civil engineering, a bit of technology. So when I graduated, I became a multifaceted PhD graduate, of which it paved a way for me to be appointed in, I would say, managerial roles, because I'm a non-executive director in some of these companies where decisions are being made. And it's through that experience. I'm not only, when you talk about PhD, most of the people will think that you are specializing in a certain area. But if we look at the world of future work, you have to be multifaceted. You have to be multidisciplinary in order for you to compete in a global scale as well, or globally. And also, I believe that when I read the report, I think you posed a question to ask if we are really doing much to absorb PhD graduates. And I've seen in the report that 60% of people are actually doing PhDs part-time. Why is that the case? I believe that people have seen that in terms of job security, it's only 2% of graduates which are unemployed in South Africa, PhD graduates. So there's a correlation between these part-time graduates and also the unemployed graduates, which are 2%. So a PhD is no longer about just deepening your knowledge. It is about advancing your career prospects and also job security. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to hit pause on this conversation for now, so if you could please just give the panelists on stage a hand as they walk down. Thank you so much. All right, while they make their way off the stage, we're going to be crossing over to who's next here? Professor Johan Moton, who is going to give us a high-level presentation on findings and recommendations by and he's the director of the DSI NRF Center of Excellence and Scientometrics. Prof, are you online? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, and over to you.
Thank you. Given the time constraints, Program Director, I won't do my presentation on high-level findings, which I prepared, and I've sent that to the DSI representatives. They are welcome to circulate my slides, which is even a shorter summary of the report than the 200 pages report. I think what I would rather do is perhaps just highlight three things. Fortunately, the Honourable Minister has covered two of the points which I think are crucial that we tried to highlight in the study. The one is, before we talk about the relationship between PhDs and the world of work, we need to have enough PhDs in the system. And it's true that the National Development Plan has set a target that 70% of all staff at universities should have a PhD by 2030, and that by 2030 we should have about 5,000 PhDs graduating. When we did this report 2 years ago, we were looking at data up to 2019. Over the past 2 years, what we've seen is a slowing in the growth of the number of doctoral graduates every year. And up to 2021, where we now stand in 2021, we graduated about 3,550 PhDs in this country. And as you will recall, that will not take into account the impact of COVID in 21, 22, and of course this year still. So the first point that I want to highlight is that the country is simply not producing enough PhDs. And because in my estimate, I think there is no way, unless there are really serious interventions from government and the private sector to provide more funding to attract more PhDs, more master students to enroll for PhDs, we will not get to 5,000 on the current forecasting models that we do. And why is that important? Because let me come back to the point of the last speaker. When we look at the PhD students in the system, and that has stayed the same for the last 20 years, 60% of them study while they work, and about 2/3 of them are actually academics. So the interesting thing is that about 40% of all PhD students at this point in time who are enrolled are academics at South African universities who are trying to get their PhDs, because the average percentage across the system is only about half of all academics having PhDs. So you have to be, we were talking about cause and effect earlier. It's very good to talk about, the absorptive capacity of the world of work. Where will our graduates go? It's clear that if you have a PhD, you are still very employable. But the first priority is to generate and produce enough PhDs to staff the universities. And because the two main missions, I would argue, of universities is to produce high-level skills for the whole of society and economy, including academia. We need enough PhDs to train the next generation of students. And secondly, to produce knowledge, of course, for the knowledge economy and knowledge society. So the reason, what the previous speaker asked, why is that the case? Well, the fact of the matter is that there's simply not enough money in the system. If we compare ourselves with Scandinavian countries, the USA and so on, where PhD students are appointed at the level of a junior lecturer with a full salary to study full time, and then they finish in 3 years. The average PhD student in this country, is typically an academic, a lecturer, a senior lecturer at the university, and study part-time because he or she has to teach and supervise, and then take 5 to 6 years to complete. So there's a knock-on effect, and that's why in another presentation, which I'll make to the NRF next week, we've looked at the fact that you mentioned in your words, Honorable Minister, that you are looking to finding R1 billion to support more PhD students. I would very strongly support that. I think we have to start at the beginning of the pipeline, and we have to support more masters and more PhD students, and that includes academics, because programs like NCAP and Future Professors, which are key programs under the UCDP, are still, to my mind, underfunded and should be expanded. So that's my one point. My second point, Program Director, very briefly, is that if you look closely at our report, you will actually see that the absorptive capacity of our PhD graduates is not as positive as people would like it to be. So on the one hand, yes, we're saying that only 2% of PhD students couldn't find employment after they graduated within a year, but because the majority of them already are employed. But where do they go? So first of all, there's a sizable proportion, about 20% of them, who can only they get a PhD and their only recourse is to get a postdoctoral fellowship, because they cannot get a permanent position at the university because there are not sufficient vacancies. And then we get this situation which we call serial postdocs, of people having 2, 3, 4 postdocs. And basically, it means that even the university system, the academic system, cannot absorb its own PhD graduates. And then finally, if you look at the business sector and you look, there's one of the Sankey diagrams where we show that in the early 2000s, the first 5 years after graduation, about 15% of PhD students that graduated came from the business sector. That has declined to 12% by 2018, which means that there are less students that graduating that come from business and go back to business. And that, of course, should not surprise us because, as you know, and Dr. Fulmadwaga know, the business expenditure on R&D in this country has declined significantly over the last 10, 15 years. So there's not enough investment by the private sector in R&D where those PhD graduates could, in theory, get positions. I'll suffice with these 2 comments, Program Director. Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. Muton, and apologies for the slight change in program. We needed to accommodate some different eventualities. I think that leads us to the end of the program. I've agreed with the moderator of the panel that we'll close off now with a quick vote of thanks. So firstly, I would want to thank the moderator of the panel discussion and Business Day TV for giving us the opportunity to be able to share this kind of findings with a wider audience. I also want to thank, can I just get my notes so I don't forget anyone? Yeah, I've been given a list of people to thank. I also want to thank the CEO of the WRC who has left for facilitating the study and the WRC team that we work very well with. The director of the NRF, DSI Center of Excellence for cytometrics and STI policy, and the leader of the research team, Professor Johan Muton. I also want to thank in particular the members of the study reference group, which included different stakeholder groups, the WRC, the DHET, USAF, the CSR, Northwest University, and the CSR, who informed and informed the study project at different stages. All the panelists today, I think your insights, your contributions, and also to the members of the audience who, the limited number, were given an opportunity to make comments. I think as the one discussion was going on, there's a lot to do in this space, and your input is always welcome. Our physical host, the CSR, as people know, this is the science diplomacy capital, so we always value opportunities to reinforce that brand of our work. And then I want to thank the Minister in absentia. He had to leave to attend to a interview with Power FM at this point in time, for the leadership, the guidance, and also for the responsiveness. I think in our briefing this morning, generated a whole range of additional work for us, but we hope together with the NRF and USAF and the DHET, we would be able to do this. And then finally, the team who have made today's event possible, in terms of our units, the research and development unit, the communications unit, our supply chain team, and every other member. I thank you for your participation. I hope you will be able to get copies of the report online. It will be published soon, and physical copies. And let's see this as a beginning of a deeper conversation. We will be doing this studies regularly, but also how to build on the findings for practical policy action. So thank you. I wish you a successful day forward. Bye-bye.
Record.